Section 1 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. October's bright blue weather. O suns and skies and clouds of June, and flowers of June together, ye cannot rival for 1 hour October's bright blue weather, when loud the bumblebee makes haste, belated, thriftless, vagrant, and goldenrod is dying fast, and lanes with grapes are fragrant, when gentians roll their fringes tight to save them for the morning, and chestnuts fall from satin burrs without a sound of warning, when on the ground red apples lie in piles like jewels shining, and redder still on old stone walls are leaves of woodbine twining, when all the lovely wayside things their white-winged seeds are sowing, and in the fields still green and fair late aftermaths are growing, when springs run low and on the brooks in idle golden freighting bright leaves sink noiseless in the hush of woods for winter waiting, when comrades seek sweet country haunts by twos and twos together, and count like misers hour by hour October's bright blue weather. O suns and skies and flowers of June, count all your boasts together. Love loveth best of all the year October's bright blue weather. Helen Hunt Jackson. End of Section 1. This recording is in the public domain. Section 2 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. Sonnet, October. Ay, thou art welcome, heaven's delicious breath, when woods begin to wear the crimson leaf, and suns grow meek, and the meek suns grow brief, and the year smiles as it draws near its death. Wind of the sunny south, oh, still delay in the gay woods and in golden air, like to a good old age released from care, journeying in long serenity away. In such a bright lake quiet, would that I might wear out life like thee, mid bowers and brooks, and dearer yet the sunshine of kind looks, and music of kind voices ever nigh. And when my last sand twinkled in the glass, pass silently from men, as thou dost pass. William Cullen Bryant. End of Section 2. This recording is in the public domain. Section 3 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. Sonnet, Autumn. Thou comest, Autumn, heralded by the rain, with banners, by great gales incessant fanned, brighter than brightest silks of Samarcand, and stately oxen harnessed to thy wain. Thou standest, like imperial Charlemagne, upon thy bridge of gold, thy royal hand outstretched with benedictions o'er the land, blessing the farms through all thy vast domain. Thy shield is the red harvest moon, suspended so long beneath the heaven's o'erhanging eaves. Thy steps are by the farmer's prayers attended like flames, upon an altar shine the sheaves, and following thee, in thy ovation splendid, thine almoner the wind scatters the golden leaves. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. End of Section 3. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 4 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Tavarish. The Columbine. Botanically, the Columbine is called Aquilegia, from the Latin word aquila, meaning an eagle, in reference to a fancied likeness of the spurs of its flowers to the talons of an eagle. It is one of the crowfoot family, Ranunculaceae. This pretty and herbaceous perennial is distributed over most of the north temperate zone, and if not altogether a child of the mountains, it may be sought in rocky or stony localities. One is surprised to find the graceful Columbine defying the storms with its roots carefully fastened in the deep crevasses of the rocks of rugged mountains and protruding its nodding flowers above some steep ledge where human foot has never trod. To many a weary wayfarer this little hermit flower has brought joy and pleasure. Though attractive to the lover of flowers, it is not met with in folklore nearly as frequently as many other species of plants that are far less attractive. The genus Aquilegia includes about 20 species and an endless number of varieties produced by the skill and intelligence of the gardener. The United States can claim the prettiest of all the species of this widely distributed group. One species is the wild columbine, Aquilegia canadensis, of our illustration. It is common everywhere. Here it is found covering rocky hills, softening the harsh gray of the rocks with its delicate foliage. There it enlivens the woodland borders with its nodding and pretty scarlet flowers, which are lined with bright yellow. In the woods it is frequently encountered, though not as robust in its growth, as if in this sheltered position less strength is required. Another species, and the most elegant of all the columbines, is the blue rocky mountain form, Aquilegia coerulea. It is at home in the Grand Canon of the Colorado, where its wild grace and untrammeled native beauty is unsurpassed. Among the other species that should be mentioned are the yellow columbine, Aquilegia chrysantha, of the western states, and its sister, also yellow, the pubescent columbine, Aquilegia pubescens, of the Death Valley of California. The Rocky Mountain and yellow columbines furnish the finest garden forms and are the parents of several beautiful varieties. Europe has its common form, Aquilegia vulgaris, and also alpine species, which, though outranked by our native species, are the originals of many of the single and double varieties of the garden. Though it has been stated that the columbines prefer the rocky hillsides, it must not be supposed that they will not tolerate a home in the border of a garden flower bed. Like many other plants of a similar nature, they thrive under cultivation, where a sunny and sheltered position is more suitable. One of the most beautiful of the garden varieties or hybrids is the double-flowered Skinner's columbine. The columbines have been called the flowers for the masses. Once started in the garden, they will propagate for years, and although perennial, they increase rapidly by self-sown seed. The young plants will acquire sufficient size and strength before the close of the growing season to endure the trying winter weather. James Jensen. End of section 4. This recording is in the public domain. Section 5 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tavarish. The Ruffed Grouse. Who knows the joy a bird knows when it goes fleetly? Who knows the joy a flower knows when it blows sweetly? Bird wing and flower stem, break them who would? Bird wing and flower stem, make them who could? This world is very beautiful, and the birds and flowers help to make it so. When we think what the world would be without the fluttering of wings and the carols of birds, without the color and perfume of the lilies and roses and the myriads of wild flowers that lift their pretty heads from banks of dainty moss, or nod to their reflection in the clear waters of the brook, we begin to feel what beauty they possess and what a grace they give to our lives. Birds have been named often from their appearance. The name grouse means gray hen, and this family of game birds as a whole is of this color. I must now tell you of a wonderful thing that happened just a while ago. You all know about the Queen's Diamond Jubilee over in England? The papers every day gave interesting accounts of the Queen and her people, how they loved her, how they applauded her whenever she showed her good, kind face to them. I had said to my brother that I wished I could see such a wonderful jubilee, when he replied, "Can you keep a secret? Of course you know that I can." "Listen then," he whispered softly. "If you wish to see some things as strange as the Queen's Jubilee, be ready on your wheel at 11 tonight. Say not a word to anyone." "But where are we going?" I asked. "That I shall not tell you. If you care to come, all right. If not, I shall go alone." Of course I was ready. Our wheels seemed to rise into the air, and flying swiftly as the wind, we at last alighted in a nest of hills, a lovely spot. The moonlight was shining and strange winged figures were flitting about. One of them challenged us, but when the password "Jubilee" was given he let us pass. The air was filled with the whirring of wings and the voices of the birds. They seemed to be very busy getting ready for some great event. Suddenly a drumming noise was heard, and all the birds were still. Looking at the open space, I saw a log, and standing proudly there was a fine ruffed grouse. Soon he spoke. "Brothers of the grouse family, long have I waited for this day. It is the proudest moment of my life. To the broad prairies and lofty hills of America I bid you welcome, O my brothers. I am glad so many of the ladies are present too." And then Mr. Grouse spread his ruffs so wide that we could hardly see his head, and made several low bows to the grouse hens who fluttered their sober gray wings. "In the name of all the grouse in America I welcome you. And now, brother and sister grouse, I have the honor of introducing the cock-o'-the-woods who will take the log." The drumming and whirring of wings and cries of "Cock! Cock!" that followed this speech of the ruffed grouse almost deafened us. At last Mr. Capercailzie, called by his intimate friends Cock-o'-the-woods, advanced to the log. Ah, but he was a handsome bird! Very large, he weighed at least 16 pounds, with brilliant plumage of black, brown, and white, and dark green feathers in his chest. The scarlet patches of skin over his eyes were very bright in the moonlight. He looked slowly around, bowing to the applause, and said, "I thank you for your welcome. In the name of all who have come from distant lands, from Asia and Europe, I thank you. We have come to hold a grouse jubilee. Surely we may well hold such a meeting and review our history and accomplishments, if the people who are really only newcomers into our lands can hold a jubilee over a queen whose family have been in England but a few hundred years. What are 100 years in the history of our family who lived in England and northern Europe thousands of years ago? I will call upon the willow grouse to tell us the history of our famous family as he knows it." Slowly Mr. Willow Grouse advanced to the log, chewing the bud of a birch tree as he came. He bowed and said, "Mr. Chairman, you must excuse my slow speech, but you know I am the eldest brother of the grouse family and am not so strong as I used to be. Our history is certainly wonderful. Thousands of years ago we came southward with the ice, and as the ice melted we flew north again. Today we live in many lands. I have traveled from Scandinavia with my wife and children, flying over Siberia and Alaska. My wife and I dress alike, and our gray summer suits are good for traveling. In winter we prefer white coats, for then the hunter cannot tell us from the snow." Just then a bird near us muttered, "That is nothing remarkable. I have 3 suits every year." "Hush!" said a bird near him. "You must not interrupt." But the willow grouse had finished, and after the young grouse had given him the front seat, for they are very kind to the old, the grouse who had boasted of his coats said, "Mr. President, I come from the high mountain peaks. Men call me ptarmigan, or winged, because I have such thick plumage. As this is summer, my legs and feet are quite bare, and my coat is the color of the twigs. But you should see my winter suit. It is thick and soft and white as snow, and thick downy stockings cover my feet. They help me to take my way over the snow. In the autumn my coat changes to gray, the color of the rocks on the mountain side. It is hard work sometimes to find enough to eat so high up in the mountains, but better a dish of leaves in freedom than to live on plenty in constant fear of the gun of the hunter." "Cock, cock," said the grouse, and it sounded so much like our "hear, hear," that I almost laughed aloud. "The next number on our program will be a waltz," said the chairman. A waltz, I thought. Grouse waltzing? Who ever heard of such a thing? Just then a handsome young capercailzie came to the log. It is not strange they are called the cocks of the wood, for they are certainly the handsomest of the grouse family. He puffed out his feathers, strutted back and forth on the log, and began his waltz. It was a comical sight. While he was dancing he kept up the oddest singing, all on one note. Soon a black cock joined him, and then they tried to show off. Some hands favored the capercailzie, and some gathered around the black cock. At last all took sides, and it would have ended in a fight, only the dignified chairman stopped the dance and told them to remember that this was not a fight but a jubilee. The cocks lowered their wings, but I believe they will fight it out sometime. "Let us hear from the red grouse! Let us hear from the red grouse!" cried several birds at once. A small bird with rich red-brown plumage came to the log. "This is the first time I have ever been away from Great Britain," said the red grouse, "and I must be back for the 12th of August. That is an exciting day. All summer my wife and I keep with the children and live in peace. But on that day the hunters come. It is great fun to wait till they come very near and then whiz past so quickly that the shot does not reach you." "Great fun indeed," muttered the ptarmigan. "Fun for the hunter to slay his thousands every year." "Yes, that is true," replied the red grouse, "but we live in safety all the year except the hunting season. The keepers and hunters keep the eagle and the fox and all our foes away, and our family of red grouse in Scotland is larger now than before the hunters came. It is because we are on the moors that all the wealthy people come to Scotland in August. Thousands of strangers fill the land, and they all come for us, the little red grouse who live only on British moors. We are proud of the fact that we are the only bird that belongs to Great Britain alone. We take care of our young together, my mate and I, and in October we join other families and fly to the uplands." Just here the hens of the capercailzie and the black cock began a noisy clatter. "I wish our husbands were like the red grouse," said one. "I think it is a perfect shame," said another. "My mate never stays near the nest. When I must leave the eggs to hunt for food, he is never there to keep them warm." "I wish I were a willow grouse or a red grouse," said another demure little hen. The black cocks and the capercailzie looked rather ashamed. Even the chairman hung his head, but he quickly called the hens to order, saying, "Now we will hear from our American friend, the ruffed grouse." "Wake up, wake up! You have been sleeping in the moonlight." "Where is the ruffed grouse?" I sleepily ask, and then my brother laughs and asks what I have been dreaming. So it was all a dream, and the moonlight, the pines, the grouse, and the jubilee have been but parts of a dream. "You awoke me, and now you must tell me about the ruffed grouse," I say to my brother. "Well, you must know that there are many varieties of grouse in our broad land, but the ruffed grouse is the gamiest and the handsomest in plumage of all the grouse family. It is swifter on the wing and harder to shoot. The bird is called ruffed grouse because he can raise the numerous wide soft feathers on each side of the neck and make a ruff like those the ladies used to wear when Elizabeth was Queen of England. His favorite home is in the heavy bird forests or in the thickets of the scrub oak, and he is seldom found in places open enough for good hunting with the dogs. When disturbed, the birds fly like an arrow for the thickest shelter. They dart behind the tree trunks or light upon its branches, and are so still and so exactly the color of the tree that they look like part of it. The ruffed grouse are found in all parts of the United States. They go in pairs or in small companies. The drumming noise made by the male when he is calling his mate is a very pleasant sound in the woods and may sometimes be heard a mile away. He selects a hollow log, struts back and forth upon it, and at last strikes his sides with his wings so rapidly that the noise resembles distant thunder. When his mate comes he raises his ruff until his head is almost hidden. He spreads his tail like a fan and tries to make himself lovely in her eyes. They build their nest on the ground. It is made of grass, twigs, and leaves. The mother bird is very clever in protecting her young brood. If she hears someone near, she gives a cluck, and they disappear while she moves slowly along, trying to lead the intruder away from the nest. When she can get behind the tree, she flies swiftly away, coming back to the nest when she thinks all is safe. "Go to sleep again, and perhaps you will have another dream," laughed my brother. "That is all interesting, but I am sorry I did not hear the ruffed grouse tell his own story." Florence Holbrook. End of section 5.
Section 6 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Michel Greby. The Blue Gentians. During the reign of King Gentius, Illyria was devastated by the plague. So great was the mortality among his subjects, the pious king appointed a season of fasting, and prayed that if he shot an arrow into the air, the Almighty would direct its descent, guiding it to some herb possessed of sufficient virtue to arrest the course of the disease. The king shot the arrow, and in falling it cleft the root of a plant which, when tested, was found to possess the most astonishing curative powers, and did much to lessen the ravages of the plague. The plant from that time on became known as the gentian, in honor of the good king whose supplications brought about the divine manifestation of its medicinal properties. The old herbalists called the gentian baldmoin, or feldwode. The first of these names is supposed to have been derived from the Latin valde bona, meaning very good. It was regarded as a specific for poisons and pestilence, and an excellent remedy for wounds caused by mad dogs. The term feldwode carries the associations of the plant back to the time of Greek myths and fables. Tellus, the goddess of the earth, possessed the power to produce plants potent for enchantments. Hence, when Medea besought Tellus to evolve a plant which would give the element of renewed youth to the mixture in her cauldron, the goddess produced the gentian, or feldwode, which restored to the aged Aeson the freshness and vigor of youth. The genus Gentiana includes nearly 200 species distributed from boreal to tropical regions, although the majority are found in the north temperate zone. A large number of species are found in Europe, more than 60 having been reported from Russia, and there are nearly 100 in North America. Several very beautiful forms come from the Swiss Alps, which rarely attain a height of more than 3 or 4 inches. The deep blue flowers of these diminutive specimens retain their color for years after being pressed for the herbarium, thus differing from many of the larger forms whose corollas quickly fade. One of the most attractive and familiar of the gentians is the fringed or blue gentian, Gentiana crenita. It is generally found in low grounds, along watercourses or ditches, and while quite generally distributed, it is sparing of its favors, as the long peduncles that terminate the stem, or simple branches, support but a single flower. The plant grows to a height of from 1 to 2 feet, and the leaves, placed opposite to each other, have rounded or heart-shaped bases attached directly to the stems, entire edges, and tapering points. The sky-blue flower is bell-shaped, nearly 2 inches long, and with the lobes strongly fringed. This is partially enclosed by a calyx, which is nearly as long as the corolla. A much more common form, found growing in fields and woodlands, is the closed gentian, Gentiana andrewsii. The fanciful name cloistered heart has been given to the plant because of the story that once a fairy queen sought to elude pursuit by secreting herself in the flower of a fringed gentian. In order that she might be more effectually shielded, the plant closed the lobes of its corolla, and in gratitude the queen decorated the interior of the flower with brilliant stripes. It is in order to preserve this fairy painting that the flowers have remained closed ever since. The closed gentian has leaves with rough edges and a narrow base. The flowers are blue or occasionally white, closed at the mouth, forming an inflated club-shaped corolla with stripes on the inside. They are arranged in clusters on the ends of the peduncles or flower stems, and are from 1 inch to 1.5 inches in length. Both the fringed and the blue gentian bloom during the autumn months, and are among the most attractive forms that mark the close of the floral season. The medicinal properties of the gentian are obtained from the root, which after being powdered yields its remedial qualities to water and alcohol. As a tonic it has been used from remote times, and it is said that the Swiss macerate the plants in cold water, the sugar they contain causing fermentation, which results in a spirituous liquor, bitter and unpleasant, but much used by them. The root is found as an ingredient in many of the ancient receipts transmitted from the Greeks and Romans, and is still employed in a great variety of complaints. Charles S. Radin. End of section 6. This recording is in the public domain. Section 7 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Michelle Grebe. To the Fringed Gentian. Thou blossom bright with autumn dew, and coloured with the heaven's own blue, that openest when the quiet light succeeds the keen and frosty night. Thou comest not when violets lean o'er wandering brooks and springs unseen, or columbines in purple dressed nod o'er the ground bird's hidden nest. Thou waitest late, and com'st alone, when woods are bare and birds are flown, and frosts and shortening days portend the aged year is near his end. Then doth thy sweet and quiet eye look through its fringes to the sky, blue, blue as if that sky let fall a flower from its cerulean wall. I would that thus when I shall see the hour of death draw near to me, hope, blossoming within my heart, may look to heaven as I depart. William Cullen Bryant. End of section 7. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 8 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. The Baby Lions. Gerard, a great lion hunter, once took home with him 2 baby lions, which were a month old. The lioness was about as large as a cat, and the lion a third larger. The little lioness was very timid. If anyone tried to caress her, she would repay him with a few blows from her little paws. Her brother, whom they named Hubert, was quite different. He would sit quiet, looking with some astonishment at all that passed, but was not cross. He was idolized by the children, who were ever fond of petting him. The lioness could not be induced to take sufficient food, and she finally died. Hubert got along nicely, and was as healthy and strong as if he had been reared in the forest. He was taken to a camp of soldiers, where he became the idol of the regiment. He was always present at parade, and would play with the men during leisure hours. As he grew older, his capers became somewhat serious. He showed a liking for sheep and donkeys, which made it necessary for him to be chained. Finally, after he had killed a horse and dangerously wounded 2 men, he had to be caged. Gerard still continued to pet him, however. Every night he would open the cage, and Hubert would spring out joyously, playing with him at hide and seek, embracing him with an ardor that was more affectionate than agreeable. One night as they played, Hubert came very near strangling his master, and probably would have succeeded if the soldiers had not beaten him away. That was the last time they played hide and seek together. Hubert was afterwards sent to Paris. Some time later Gerard went to see him. Hubert was lying half asleep, not taking much notice of the visitors. Suddenly he raised his head, His eyes enlarged, and there was a nervous twitching of the muscles of his face. He swung his tail from side to side, showing that the sight of the well-known uniform had aroused him. He knew the uniform, but had not yet recognized his old master. Girard approached and thrust his hand into the cage. It was a touching scene which followed. The lion, without taking his eyes from his master, put his nose to the outstretched hand and began to breathe deeply. With every breath his eyes became more affectionate. And when Girard said to him, "Well, Hubert, my old soldier," he made a terrible bound against the bars of his cage, which trembled beneath his weight. He stood up, pressed against the bars, and tried to break through them. He licked his old master's hand with joy. If anyone else came near the cage, he became very angry. At last Girard went away, and when he was out of sight, Hubert made the cage tremble with his cries and bounds. End of section 8. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 9 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Betty B. Sunflowers and Daisies. The day's eye, or else the eye of day. The emprise and flower of flowers allay. Chaucer, Good Women, L. 184. The sunflowers are mostly large, erect, perennial herbs, with the flowers characteristic of the order Compositae. They are natives of tropical America, but have become widely distributed in cultivation, appreciated on account of their large yellow flowers. They not only thrive very luxuriantly under cultivation, but spread very quickly spontaneously. Every one is familiar with the sunflower as it appears in cultivation, hence no special description shall be given of it. It is kin to the ironweed, the dandelion, the goldenrods, the asters, and the daisies. It would be impracticable to describe or mention all the species and varieties of sunflowers and their numerous relatives. We shall refer very briefly to a few of the more common kinds. Helianthus annuus is a commonly cultivated species. The seeds of this plant furnish a very useful oil. The flowers yield honey and a useful dye. The stalks a textile fabric, and the leaves fodder. The seeds of this and other species are also used as food, and as a surrogate for coffee. The carefully dried and prepared leaves have been used as a substitute for tobacco in cigars. Poultry eat the seeds very greedily and thrive well upon them, due to the oil present. It is also maintained that a large number of sunflowers about a dwelling place will serve as a protection against malaria. An infusion of the stem is said to be anti-malarial. H. tuberosus, known as the Jerusalem artichoke, has large tuberous roots, which are sometimes eaten when cooked or pickled. Several species are said to have decided medicinal properties. H. odora is said to be carminative, diuretic, stimulant, and antiemetic. H. rigida is tonic and astringent. H. virgaurea of both continents is also astringent and tonic. In the eclectic school of medicine, the infusion of seeds is used as a mild expectorant, and the expressed oil as a diuretic. The diuretic properties are said to be due to niter, which occurs most plentifully in the central pith of the stalks. The medicinal virtues of the sunflowers are very limited and uncertain. Their principal use is that of a showy garden plant. That they check or prevent malaria is quite probable, because of their draining effect upon the soil, rather than any medicinal property residing in the plants themselves. The daisies, of which the ox-eye daisy is a well-known example, are garden and field favorites. As already indicated, they are kin to the sunflowers. The word daisy is a contraction of the Old English words day's eye, that is, the eye of day, meaning the sun, as indicated in the verse from Chaucer. There are a great many flowers known as daisies, and again a given one has a number of popular names. For instance, Rudbeckia hirta (see illustration) is variously designated yellow daisy, black-eyed Susan, niggerhead, golden Jerusalem, and ox-eye daisy. The two plates illustrate the tall or giant sunflower, H. giganteus, and the daisy just referred to. Albert Schneider. End of section 9. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 10 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org. A True Story of a Wayward Bobwhite. Mother Bobwhite, with due maternal care, had selected a most appropriately concealed spot for her treasure. The roughly constructed nest was built upon high ground, and was artfully hidden at the base of a tuft of dried grass. That the necessary moisture which adds vitality and strength to the young should not be lacking, she had deposited her eggs almost upon the bare earth, only a thin but closely woven mat of dried grass intervening between the 9 white eggs and the brown earth. The days of incubation were divided between the 2 old birds, the cock performing his share of the parent's duties. When the hen was collecting her food, he would nestle down upon the eggs with a care equally as great as that bestowed by the mother. After the chicks were hatched, the cock shook himself free of any and all responsibility and betook himself to the meadows to enjoy the more liberal forage. This desertion was most satisfactory to the mother, for no doubt she wished to have the entire training of the little ones left strictly to her care. She would not lead the chicks forth until sure of his departure. What fluffy little brown beauties they were as they dodged in and out among the weeds and grasses, learning their first lessons in the roughest school of life, the school of experience. They had many dangers to guard against, and they learned that much work was required of them before their insatiable little appetites were satisfied. They must brave attacks from foxes, skunks, weasels, and minks upon the ground, and at the same time keep an alert eye upward for the sudden advent of some hungry hawk by day, or the relentless swoop of owls by night. Their nights were spent in anxiety, and in fact, then they were most insecure, as owls, and foxes especially, appreciate a young quail and exert themselves to capture them. Their caution, however, could not interfere with their obtaining a supply of food and water, so they braved many dangers every hour of their lives, and not many days after their entrance into this world, they had gained the assurance which comes from meeting and overcoming difficulties. Mother Bobwhite had been carefully guarding her little brown family, leading them forth daily in quest of small bugs and scattered seeds, always upon the lookout for possible enemies, never failing to flutter away, feigning a crippled wing, should I chance to come upon her suddenly. And on such occasions, look as quickly and intently as I might, I seldom caught a glimpse of those brown bodies that so well obey the parting cry of warning, uttered by the mother as she fluttered just beyond my reach, leading me straight away from her trembling family. Should you wish to find one of the little chicks, you may do so by carefully feeling among the tufts of grass and other decayed brown vegetation near the spot where one's eye lost them. Upon one occasion, I discovered several of this little brood in a most peculiar and interesting situation. I had startled the mother bird while she was leading her young ones through a wood, the ground thickly covered with dried leaves, and as she fluttered away from almost beneath my feet, I dared not move for fear of crushing one of the chicks. They scattered and seemed to have disappeared on all sides near me. Gazing intently upon the mass of brown leaves, I was thinking how I could extricate myself without harming the hidden brood, when my eye caught the slight motion of a leaf almost against my foot. I stooped and gently raised the leaf. It felt wonderfully heavy. This oddity of weight prepared me for the surprise yet in store. When the leaf had been lifted a sufficient distance to enable me to look beneath, I caught a glimpse of a tiny brown rascal clinging desperately. He was in the drollest of positions, clinging feet uppermost. I soon learned to know about where Mrs. Bob White's brood could be found, and they were quite grateful for the crumbs scattered daily within their reach, usually along an old and dusty wagon road which passed but a short distance from the spot where the nest had been. The mother would lead her flock forth, where, for a few minutes, would be enacted an amusing scene as she attempted their education in the art of dusting themselves. They would stand amazed, watching the cloud of fine dust raised by their teacher, until one by one they seemed to understand her meaning, and then, squatting down in a circle, they made feeble imitations of her vigorous motions. Wayward Bob was one of this family of 9, but as yet he had not been named, and indeed, had he been, it would have taken a close critic to have distinguished him from his relatives. Bob, together with his brothers and sisters, was 7 days old and had learned quite rapidly to pick small bugs from the weeds and grasses, when a great misfortune befell him, and I fear but for my timely assistance, 9 little homeless, motherless quails would have sadly longed for the sturdy care of their affectionate guardian. I had repaired to the old wagon road to scatter a few crumbs upon the ground and watch the antics of my little friends. This time they were later than usual in coming to their dusting place. No doubt the mother had given them a wider knowledge of their little world that day. When they came, I caught sight of them some distance from the side of the road, wending their way through a tangle of weeds near a large pile of stones. As I looked, a weasel darted from under those concealing rocks, and I cried aloud and rushed forward, but my assistance came too late for the heroic little mother, and thus 9 little orphans were thrust upon me for support. The young ones were so terrified by the suddenness of their affliction that they gathered in a helpless knot by the scene of the tragedy. I gently lifted 8 of the fluffy chicks and deposited them in my hat. There was yet one more to be cared for. He looked up with an expression of trust and fear commingled. I reached forth my hand to take him, but, being a sturdy little fellow, he decided to take his chances in the wide world, so he quickly darted from my hand and disappeared among the many weeds close by. I finally captured the willful son, and, fearing lest he should again elude me, I carried him in one hand apart from those in the hat. This is how a little quail came to live with me, and he received the sturdy name of Bob because of its aptness to his nature. Bob's brothers and sisters were given to a bantam hen who had made a failure with her own brood. She was happy to receive these new cares, and this time accomplished her maternal duties to her entire satisfaction, rearing all to their full growth. But Bob went with me. I placed a box in my room for him, and devoted many pleasant moments to feeding him, watching his growth, and training his belligerent ways. My little friend became a great mischief as he grew older. He was allowed full freedom that summer and fall, and his favorite pastime was annoying a brood of late-hatched chickens. Down he would fly among those chicks, pecking at them spitefully, until the mother forced him to beat a hasty retreat. One noon, as the dining-room door stood ajar, Bob entered with a whir, alighting upon a table when luncheon was being served. The visitor helped himself daintily from the contents of a platter. I reached my hand toward the pretty offender, but his fear of my touch caused him to fly quickly aside. In doing this he collided with a cup of tea, thus upsetting it and causing the contents to fall upon my mother's gown. This act barred him from the dining-room, and he then contented himself by pursuing flies and grasshoppers upon the lawn. One day a large grasshopper alighted upon my window. Bob's alert form came a moment later, and he made a dart for the coveted morsel. The grasshopper flew across the room, alighting behind a picture which was standing upon a table. Bob, nothing daunted by his late failure, flew rapidly across the room, and against the picture. He had the grasshopper this time, and it disappeared rapidly down his brown throat. But that was not the end, for the picture toppled forward and fell, breaking the delicate framework and damaging a much prized portrait. This act brought Bob disgrace and punishment. He was not again allowed the full liberty of the house. My pet grew large and strong during the fall and winter, and I spent many pleasant moments watching his mischievous pranks and quaint actions. Spring came at last, and the summer songsters were arriving, treating us to many a happy anthem. The bluebird flitted by unnoticed. The robins were building their nests, and that gaudy summer visitor, the red-breasted grosbeak, had arrived in the gorgeous splendor of his spring plumage, when far away across the sweetly scented meadows echoed the bobwhite of my little pet's relatives. Bob would listen with head alert to this call, and then he would pace up and down his box just as you have seen wild animals do in a zoological garden. With all my kindness, I had failed to deaden his love for the wildlife of his kind. One day, when Bob was perched upon my windowsill, there came from across the orchard a sharp and clear bobwhite. This was more than my little friend could withstand. He walked up and down, seeking vainly for a way to escape. In his sturdy body, the varied emotions of a captive were contending. There was anxiety and hope, anger and fear, love and hate commingled in his every motion. Moved by my pet's desire for freedom, I threw open the sash. Out he flew with a joyous whir of his wings, and alighting upon the fence with his characteristic energy, he uttered his first bobwhite, clear and strong. He remained near home, giving me a good opportunity to watch his habits. He daily came to the house for food, and never was he disappointed, as I regularly placed a handful of wheat where he could reach it. One day a great happiness entered the life of my little friend. He was uttering his call with the sweet, tremulous notes of a lovesick life. Born from the upper orchard, there came an answering call from another lover in search of a bride. Bob's head went up higher and higher. He hurried along on an old rail fence, sending his challenge for combat across to his rival, for lurking near was a little brown form watching Bob's sturdy mien with piqued interest. He sped quickly to her side, she retreating farther and farther away across the orchard to the place where the other lover was watching and waiting for the rival who had gained favor in her eyes. Bob and his rival met face to face in the dusty wagon road near the spot where my pet's early life was spent. Then there was a duel for love, with the little modest brown ladybird as umpire and prize. The rivals chased each other up and down the dusty lane. At last Bob was victorious, and his rival quickly took wing, followed by the angry victor. Presently Bob returned alone, and approached his bride. She had laid a scheme to test his love, and was now ready to abide by the result of the conflict. My little pet led his mate away through the wavy grasses, a victor and a king over the heart of his loved one. Several weeks later, after a nest had been built and a downy brood hatched, I came upon my old pet. It was a sunny day, and while strolling down an orchard path, Bob flew down in front of me where he stood, trembling and terrified. Thinking to help my old friend in his distress, I put forth my hand to take him up. I should have known him better. In an instant he was changed. He eyed me with that old, keen, distrustful glance, rose quickly from my feet, and flew rapidly away. Hardly had he gone 50 yards when a pigeon hawk that had been waiting and watching darted forth and swooped down upon poor Bob while in midair. A loud snap as the hawk struck, a sharp cry from the bonny victim, and a few feathers floating slowly down, told too pathetically of Bob's awful fate. I gathered up the scattered plumage, a memorial of the little wayward quail I had fed and reared to maturity. Bob seemed quite a patriot to me as I reflected upon his decision when he eluded my hand that final time. "Liberty or death," he seemed to say, as he flew rapidly away. He exhibited that trait in his bird-like way, by which great men have won fame and renown. So he, too, is worthy of having his story related and his life immortalized. Charles Thomson. End of section 10.
Section 11 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by C. Mori. The Oswego tea. The Labiatae, or family of mints, consists of about 160 genera, including the one to which the Oswego tea of our illustration belongs. Under these genera are classed over 3,000 distinct species. Many of these are well-known plants, such as the mints, pennyroyal, anise, bergamot, fennel, catnip, sage, thyme, lavender, and rosemary. Representatives of this family are distributed throughout the world in the temperate and tropical regions. In fact, it is one of the most cosmopolitan of the plant families. The characteristics of the family are very marked. The foliage abounds in volatile oils which generally give off an aromatic odor, especially when the leaves are bruised. The leaves are opposite and usually arise from a four-sided stem. The flowers, as a rule, are strongly two-lipped. This character gives to the family its scientific name, which is derived from a Latin word meaning lip. The stamens are attached to the corolla and are usually 4 in number, 2 of which are longer than the others. The ovary is 4-lobed, and the resulting fruit consists of 4 nutlets, each containing 1 seed. The Oswego tea belongs to the genus Monarda, a group of plants named in honor of Nicolas Monardes, a Spanish physician and botanist of the 16th century. He wrote a number of valuable papers on the medicinal and other economic plants, especially treating of those from America. This genus includes about 10 species, all natives of North America and Mexico. The Oswego tea, Monarda didyma, is frequently called bee balm, and locally it is often known as fragrant balm, mountain mint, and Indian plume. This plant prefers a moist soil near the wooded banks of streams and in the hilly and mountainous regions of Canada and the United States east of the Mississippi River. In North Carolina, it is found at an altitude of over 5,000 feet. The leaves are egg-shaped, elongated, taper-pointed, and more or less saw-toothed on the margins. The floral leaves are tinged with red of nearly the same shade as that of the bright red and showy flowers. The flowers, which appear in July, August, and September, are about 2 inches in length, are massed in a dense, solitary, and globular head, which is situated on the end of the flower stalk. The flowers produce an abundant nectar, which attracts bumblebees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. These, by transferring the pollen from flower to flower, assist in the fertilization of the developing seeds. The ordinary bees are barred from the sweets of this plant because of their short tongues, though some forms will cut a hole in the side of the corolla and obtain the nectar in this manner. It is said that certain Indian tribes use this bark in preparing a tea that is nearly as palatable as that made from the ordinary tea of commerce. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tavarish. Flowers and their unbidden guests. In the September number we considered flowers and their invited guests, that is, the insects useful in carrying pollen. The very things which attract useful insects to flowers are attractive also to useless insects. For example, nectar in a flower seems just as desirable to an ant as to a butterfly, but the ant is a creeping insect and would be likely to lose the pollen in passing from one plant to another. If useless insects found free access to flowers and carried off their food supplies, the useful insects would soon stop visiting them. It is of great advantage to flowers, therefore, to have some means of warding off the creeping insects. It must not be understood that all plants are equally successful in this matter, or that any plant is always successful, but there are certain things which seem to hinder or discourage the approach of creeping insects to flowers. Perhaps ants may be taken as the best illustration of the insects whose visits are discouraged by flowers. They are very much attracted to the food supplies in the flower, especially the nectar, and are among the most intelligent of insects, often overcoming the most serious obstacles. They will be considered in this paper, therefore, as the insects which are seeking the nectar and pollen of flowers without invitation. A charming little book upon this subject has been written by Kerner and translated into English under the title which appears at the head of this paper. It is in this book that the chief obstacles to such unwelcome guests as ants are clearly stated. Hairs. One of the most common obstacles to ants is a barrier of hair. For some reason, ants dislike to cross such a barrier. Travelers in tropical countries where ants abound tell us that a hair rope laid around a tent is a very effective barrier against the invasion of armies of ants. Hair is very commonly found upon plants, and it may be noticed that it is apt to increase in amount and prominence towards or within the flower cluster. Sometimes the flowers themselves are hairy outside, and in the case of the trailing arbutus, whose flowers close to the ground are in special danger from creeping insects, the flowers are filled with a fluffy mass of hairs. In our illustrations, the wild columbine, the Oswego tea, the sunflower, and the ox-eyed daisy are all hairy plants and difficult for ants to climb. In the September number are illustrations of the mallow, the lady's slipper, and the New England aster, all of which are hairy and discouraging to ants. An interesting fact in connection with the wild columbine may be noted. The nectar is deposited in the knob-like bottom of the long tubular spurs, and the entrance is so carefully guarded that only a long and slender proboscis, like that of a moth or a butterfly, can reach the nectar. The bumblebees, however, have learned this fact and bite through the tips of the spurs and steal the nectar. As a consequence, the wild columbine is said to be little visited by the proboscis-bearing insects, and its pollination is seriously interfered with. Sticky excretions. Some plants have the power of excreting upon their surface a sticky substance like mucilage. This mucilage may be produced by hairs, which are then called glandular hairs, or it may appear directly on the surface of the plant. When ants or other insects try to cross such a barrier, they are not merely stopped, but caught. Upon glandular plants, it is very common to see small insects stuck fast, and it is more than probable that the nourishing material of their bodies is digested and absorbed by the plant. In this way the plant not merely stops the insect, but catches and devours it. A very common illustration of such a plant is the catchfly, whose name suggests its power. The joints of its stem are long, and near the upper end of each joint is a band of mucilage. This series of sticky bands forms a very effective barrier to any insect trying to crawl up the stem. Isolation. In some cases plants or their flowers are isolated from creeping insects by water, which forms a most efficient barrier. This has been demonstrated by housekeepers who in the days of safes were accustomed to set the legs of the safe in cans of water to ward off the invasion of ants. Of course, plants standing in the water are well isolated and usually show no further device for warding off creeping insects. There is an interesting fact connected with one of our water smartweeds, which has to do with our subject. Ordinarily it stands in shallow water and is perfectly smooth, but when occasionally the water dries up, the plant becomes hairy. That this has anything to do with the danger from creeping insects is unlikely, but the hairy covering certainly appears at a very opportune time. The teasel was once extensively cultivated as a fuller's plant, and one or two species of it have become common as wild plants, their dense and prickly flowering spikes looking like swabs for cleaning lamp chimneys. The plant is tall and coarse, and is peculiar in that its large opposite leaves unite by their bases about the stem to form a cup. In this way a series of cups is developed on the stem, and in each cup there is water. When a creeping insect crawls over the edge of the cup, he sees the stem rising from a pool of water which must be crossed. As there is a series of such pools, it is very unlikely that any such insect reaches the showy cluster of flowers. The so-called traveler's tree of the tropics is a teasel upon a larger scale. The enormous flower cluster is at the top of the plant, and between it and the ground is a series of very large water-containing cups formed by the leaves. The popular name has been given by travelers who have been represented as reaching a cup with a spear and piercing it, thus obtaining a supply of water. The story is very doubtful, and the water, usually full of the macerating bodies of insects, is still more doubtful. Latex. By this term is meant the milky juice which some plants possess. When such a plant is punctured or torn, the latex flows out, and as soon as it is exposed to the air it becomes more and more sticky until it hardens. It is from the latex of certain trees that India rubber is obtained, but it may be observed in many plants, notably the milkweeds, which have received their popular name on account of it. The milkweed may be used to illustrate how latex may be of service in warding off creeping insects. In many cases the plant is entirely smooth, and the stems of the flower cluster are even slippery. When an ant reaches these slippery surfaces it clutches for a hold, and its sharp claws pierce the tender skin of the plant. Immediately a drop of latex oozes out and becomes sticky, and when the ant seeks to lift its feet there is resistance, and in the struggle the claws clutch deeper, more latex oozes out and becomes more and more sticky until finally the insect is stuck fast. The flower clusters of certain milkweeds are often found plentifully covered with small captured insects. Protective shapes. Many flowers secrete their nectar so that a creeping insect cannot reach it, but the suitable insect can. Illustrations are numerous, but the following will suffice. The wild Columbine, represented in one of our illustrations, secretes its nectar at the bottom of long tubular spurs, which can be traversed by slender proboscis, but are impassable to creeping insects. Spurs are developed in many flowers, notably the orchids, and they are always associated with nectar secretion and the visits of proboscis-bearing insects. In the pentstemon, a plant whose flowers have two lips, as in the Oswego tea in our illustration, but not so prominent, the nectar is secreted in a little pit. Across the mouth of this pit one of the stamens, modified for this purpose, is placed like a drop bar, leaving but a thin crevice leading to the nectar pit. Through this crevice a thread-like proboscis may be thrust, but a creeping insect cannot pass. In the snapdragon, the two lips of the flower are tightly closed, the lower one decidedly projecting. Any small insect reaching this lower lip as a natural landing place finds no entrance. When the bumblebee alights upon the lower lip, however, his weight depresses it and he forces his way in, and in passing to another flower effects pollination. It is interesting to note that after this first and important visit the lips remain open, and other insects pass in freely, being invited, as someone has said, to eat at the second table. In most of the orchids there is a very complete adaptation of the flower to its insect, by which almost every insect excepting one special kind obtains nothing for its visit. The nectar is usually in the end of a long spur, and to obtain it the head of the insect must just fit between two sticky buttons to which the pollen masses are attached. The length of the spur is nicely adjusted to the length of the proboscis of the visiting insect, but his head must also be of a certain breadth. If an insect visits the flower with a proboscis too short or too long, or a head too broad or too narrow, its visit is unavailing. The danger of such narrow specialization is apparent in the case of the orchids, for each plant is so dependent upon a special insect that the disappearance of the latter seriously endangers the continued existence of the former. Protective closure. It has long been noticed that certain flowers open only in the evening primrose being a conspicuous example. These flowers are adapted to the visits of the night flyers, the moths, and about clusters of evening primroses numerous large hawk moths may be seen after sunset. During the day the flowers are closed and safe from the visits of any insect. But by opening in the evening they are not only ready for the visits of the night flyers, but they avoid the visits of most creeping insects, notably the ants, who are not abroad after the dew falls. Protection against grazing animals. Although we are considering the ways by which creeping insects are checked in their efforts to visit flowers, it seems pertinent to mention the more universal danger which comes from grazing animals. If flowers were as attractive to grazing animals as they are to insects, they would be in danger of wholesale destruction. It can be observed, however, that these animals as a rule avoid the flowers of a plant, although they may strip off its leaves. It is believed that this avoidance is due to the fact that in or about the flower cluster there are usually secreted bitter, sour, or nauseous substances, which grazing animals have learned to avoid. It should not be imagined that these substances are there for that purpose, but being there, the result is that the flowers are avoided. It is unknown how generally true this is, and the effectiveness of this method of protection may have been exaggerated. Those who can observe cattle, however, are in a position to test them with the flowers of the various plants they are known to eat, and determine how far they avoid them. In conclusion, it may be of interest to call attention to the great complexity of relations existing among plants and animals by repeating Darwin's famous illustration known as cats and clover. In a certain district in England he observed that the clover was pollinated by the bumblebees, which had their nests in the fields. It followed, therefore, that the more the bumblebees, the more the clover. He also observed that the field mice preyed upon the young broods of the bumblebees, and therefore the more the field mice, the fewer the bumblebees, and the less the clover. When cats were plenty and preyed upon the field mice, it followed that the more the cats, the fewer the mice, the more the bumblebees, and the more the clover. Therefore the crop of clover depended upon the presence of cats in the neighborhood. John Merle Coulter. End of section 12.
Section 13 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Betty B. How we may best pay the debt. In the last number of Birds and Nature, we saw that the debt we owe the birds is by no means a small one, but is really greater than we can ever hope to fully repay. It is a debt of gratitude for the good work the birds do in keeping checked the increase of insect life, which would surely become a great pest if very numerous. It is a debt of money value for the fruits and grains and other products of the earth which the birds make possible by eating the insects which eat the plants. It is a debt of love for the pleasure and inspiration which they bring with each returning springtide, for the courage which their cheerful endurance of all sorts of bad weather inspires. There is one best way to pay the debt, and that way is to take such a lively interest in the birds that we shall want to know all about their lives and as much as we can learn about the language they speak and the thoughts they have. When we have such an interest in them, we shall not want to kill them, but we shall do what we can to make them love us and trust us, so they will no longer want to fly away when we come near them. We shall be paying the debt we owe to the birds when we try to make friends with them, for there is nothing greater or better than true friendship, nothing that counts for more where friends are so greatly needed. Our first effort at making friends with the birds is usually to give them something to eat, forgetting or not knowing that what is best for us may not be good for them. After we have watched them getting their own meals, we shall know what each bird likes best, and then, instead of frightening them away with food that they cannot eat, we shall draw them to us by offering them what they like best. We may think that we shall be able to learn all about the birds if we can get them into a cage and study them there, but birds are not free to do what they want to do when they are caged up, and there are many interesting things about them that we shall never know if we study only the caged ones. What we want to know is the bird just as he is as a free bird in the fields and woods. We shall not be paying much of the debt if we cage him up even to study his habits. What we need the most is the most valuable to us. What the birds need most is a place where they can live and raise their young with the least danger. All birds are surrounded by their natural enemies, which are sure to kill a great many of them, but with the addition of cats, rats, and human beings intent upon killing them, they seem to have a poor chance of life. Then if we can provide a place or places where these enemies will be less sure to get them, and their eggs or young, we shall be paying the debt we owe in the greatest measure possible. Can we provide any such safe retreats? I think we can. Your own dooryard may be made such a retreat. Banish all cats and dogs who love bird flesh. See to it that stray cats and dogs are in danger of their lives on your lawn or in your yard. Let every boy know that the birds on your premises must not be disturbed in any way. Instead of carefully trimming out all the tangles of the vines and branches, remember that such places are where the birds delight to build their nests. Put up bird boxes and houses for the martins, wrens, swallows, and bluebirds, and keep the English sparrows out of them. Make it easy for the birds while they are feeding their young. In short, give the birds which prefer your yard a little attention, and you will soon be on friendly terms with them, and they will many times repay any trouble you may put yourself to for their sakes. Any study of the birds is not wasted time, but time profitably spent. Linz Jones. End of section 13. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 14 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. A few of the bird family. The old bob white and chipbird, the flicker and chee-wink, and little hoptity-skip bird along the river brink. The blackbird and snowbird, the chicken hawk and crane, the glossy old black crowbird and buzzard down the lane, the yellow bird and redbird, the tomtit and the cat, the thrush and that red-head bird, the rest all pickin' at, the jaybird and the bluebird, the sapsuck and the wren, the cock-a-doodle-doo bird, and our old settin' hen. James Whitcomb Riley. End of section 14. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 15 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Domestic Fowl. The writers of antiquity used the term fowl to include all the members of the bird tribe, and in some cases the young of other animals. Feathered creatures, no matter what their habits, were not called birds. Neither were they separated into classes other than the fowls of the air, fowls of the sea, fowls of the earth, and similar descriptive divisions. In the 17th and the earlier part of the 18th century, the word fowl was applied to any large feathered animal, and the term bird to those of less size. In early times, the word bird was used in the sense of brood and included the young of all animals. In an early act of the Parliament of Scotland, we find the expression wolf birdis, referring to the very young wolf. At the present time, the term fowl, in its wider sense, is generally used to include all the forms of farm poultry, both when living and when prepared for food. More specifically, it is applied to the domestic cock and hen, or, as they are more familiarly called, chickens, Gallus domesticus. The word chicken appropriately belongs to the common fowl when under 1 year of age, yet it is used to indicate those of any breed and of any age between birth and maturity. In this connection, it is of interest to note that in the English language the common fowl has no distinctive name. The term hen, frequently used, should be applied only to the female of this and other domestic fowls. The progenitor of the common fowl is generally conceded to be the red jungle fowl, Gallus ferrugineus or bankiva, though there are 3 other wild species, all oriental. This species is a native of India, a part of China, the adjacent islands, and the Philippines. Its habits are diversified, for we are told it may be found in lofty forests and in the dense thickets as well as in bamboo jungles, and when cultivated land is near its haunts, it may be seen in the fields, after the crops are cut, in straggling parties of from 10 to 20. This wild species closely resembles the breed of poultry fanciers call the black-breasted game. But the crow of the wild cock is not as loud or as prolonged as that of the tame one. All the evidence that we possess seems to indicate that this wild fowl was once domesticated in Burma. The Chinese, as indicated by tradition, received their poultry from Burma as early as 1400 BC. Records show that about 1200 or 800 BC, as some authorities hold, the eating of the tame fowl was forbidden, though the use of the wild fowl as food was permitted. It seems evident that the fowl reached Europe after domestication, about the 6th century before the time of Christ. It continued westward, for Julius Caesar found it in Britain at the time of the conquests. Both the wild and the tame fowls are mentioned by the early Latin and Greek writers. Homer, writing about 900 BC, does not refer to the fowl, but it is mentioned by Aristophanes at a date near 500 BC. It is of interest to know that the domesticated form is not mentioned in the Old Testament. It is said that some of the pagan tribes living at the present time on the east coast of Africa have a marked aversion to domestic fowl. This may account for the absence of any representation of the fowl on the ancient Egyptian monuments, though it was represented on the Babylonian cylinders about the 6th or 7th century before Christ. In this connection it should be mentioned that many other people, notably the natives of the islands adjacent to the Australian continent and some of the Indian tribes of South America, show a strong dislike to the domestic bird as food. By selection, both natural and by man, many breeds have been produced. Dr. Charles Darwin says, "Sufficient materials do not exist for tracing the history of the separate breeds. About the commencement of the Christian era, Columella mentions a 5-toed fighting breed and provincial breeds, but we know nothing about them. He also alludes to dwarf fowls, but these cannot have been the same with our bantams, which were imported from Japan into Bantam in Java." A dwarf fowl, probably the true bantam, is referred to in an old Japanese encyclopedia, as I am informed. In the Chinese encyclopedia, published in 1596, but compiled from various sources, some of high antiquity, 7 breeds are mentioned. The number of breeds is very indefinite. Darwin enumerates 13, including many sub-breeds. The American Poultry Association recognizes more than 30, with several varieties of some of them. The game or fighting breed more closely resembles the wild form of India than do any of the others. The Japanese, so noted for their wonderful development of dwarfed trees, are also the originators of the smallest fowls, the bantams. Another interesting breed is called jumpers or creepers. Their legs are so short that they are compelled to move by jumping. The wild hen lays from 8 to 12 white eggs in nests, seldom of better construction than a few dried leaves or grass scratched together in a secluded spot. It is said that to every hen belongs an individual peculiarity in the form, color, and size of her egg, which never changes during her lifetime so long as she remains in health, and which is as well known to those who are in the habit of taking her produce as the handwriting of their nearest acquaintance. We are told that the tame hen raises a brood of physically stronger offspring when allowed to select her own nesting place in some locality with natural surroundings. The wild and the tame fowl alike eat a variety of foods, both animal and vegetable, but prefer the latter. With reference to the habits and characteristics of the interesting domestic bird of our farmyards and orchards, no words can describe them more aptly than those so delightfully written by Gail Hamilton, when she says, "A chicken is beautiful and round and full of cunning ways, but he has no resources for an emergency. He will lose his reckoning and be quite out to sea, though only 10 steps from home. He never knows enough to turn a corner. All his intelligence is like light, moving only in straight lines. He is impetuous and timid, and has not the smallest presence of mind or sagacity to discern between friend and foe. He has no confidence in any earthly power that does not reside in an old hen. Her cluck will be followed to the last ditch, and to nothing else will he give heed." I am afraid that the interpreter was putting almost too fine a point upon it when he had Christiana and her children into another room where was a hen and chickens, and bid them observe a while. So one of the chickens went to a trough to drink, and every time she drank she lifted up her head and her eyes toward heaven. "See," said he, "what this little chick doth, and learn of her to acknowledge whence your mercies come by receiving them with looking up." Doubtless the chick lifted her eyes toward heaven, but a close acquaintance with the race would put anything but acknowledgment in the act. A gratitude that thanks heaven for favors received, and then runs into a hole to prevent any other person from sharing the benefit of these favors, is a very questionable kind of gratitude, and certainly should be confined to the bipeds that wear feathers. Yet if you take away selfishness from a chicken's moral makeup, and fatuity from his intellectual, you have a very charming creature left. For apart from their excessive greed, chickens seem to be affectionate. They have sweet social ways. They huddle together with fond caressing chatter, and chirp soft lullabies. Their toilet performances are full of interest. They trim each other's bills with great thoroughness and dexterity, much better indeed than they dress their own heads, for their bungling, awkward little claws make sad work of it. It is as much as they can do to stand on 2 feet, and they naturally make several revolutions when they attempt to stand on one. Nothing can be more ludicrous than their early efforts to walk. They do not really walk. They sight their object, waver, balance, decide, and then tumble forward, stopping all in a heap as soon as the original impetus is lost, generally some way ahead of the place to which they wished to go. It is delightful to watch them as drowsiness films their round, bright, black eyes, and the dear old mother croons them under her ample wings, and they nestle in perfect harmony. How they manage to bestow themselves with such limited accommodations, or how they manage to breathe in a room so close, it's difficult to imagine. They certainly deal a staggering blow to our preconceived notions of the necessity of oxygen and ventilation, but they make it easy to see whence the Germans derived their fashion of sleeping under feather beds. But breathe and bestow themselves they do. The deep mother breast and the broad mother wings take them all in. They penetrate her feathers, and open for themselves unseen little doors into the mysterious, brooding, beckoning darkness. But it is long before they can arrange themselves satisfactorily. They chirp and stir and snuggle, trying to find the softest and warmest nook. Now an uneasy head is thrust out, and now a whole tiny body, but it soon re-enters in another quarter, and at length the stir and chirp grows still. You see only a collection of little legs, as if the hen were a banyan tree, and presently even they disappear. She settles down comfortably, and all are wrapped in a slumberous silence. As I sit by the hour watching their winning ways, and see all the steps of this sleepy subsidence, I can but remember that outburst of love and sorrow from the lips of him who, though he came to earth from a dwelling place of ineffable glory, called nothing unclean because it was common, found no homely detail too homely or too trivial to illustrate the Father's love, but from the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, the lilies of the field, the stones in the street, the foxes in their holes, the patch on the coat, the oxen in the furrow, the sheep in the pit, the camel under his burden, drew lessons of divine pity and patience, of heavenly duty and delight. End of section 15.
Section 16 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. Bob White. Who's whistling so cheerfully down in the clover, when the meadows are wet with the sweet morning dew? He's piping and calling, this ardent young lover, and telling his tale the whole morning through. What is it he says in the early sunlight? Bob White! Bob White! Bob White! At noon, when the day god in wrath has descended, with his swift golden arrows on grain field and hill, and the birds of the morning their love songs have ended, then deep in the wood and down by the rill, I hear a shrill whistle, so cheerful and bright. Wheat ripe? Bob White? Not quite. When shadows of evening are lengthening slowly, ere the night dews lie damp on the meadows again, as light breezes sweep o'er the soft grass so lowly, what is it he says? I hear the refrain, while in the thick verdure he's hid from my sight. Good night, Bob White! Good night! Effie L. Hallett. End of section 16. This recording is in the public domain. Section 17 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. Untitled. It might almost be said that the birds are all birds of the poets, and of no one else, because it is only the poetical temperament that fully responds to them. So true is this that all the great ornithologists, original namers and biographers of the birds, have been poets indeed, if not in word. Audubon is a notable case in point, who, if he had not the tongue or pen of the poet, certainly had the eye and ear and heart, and the singleness of purpose, the enthusiasm, the unworldliness, the love, that characterize the true and divine race of bards. The very idea of a bird is a symbol and a suggestion to the poet. A bird seems to be at the top of the scale, so vehement and intense is his life. Large-brained, large-lunged, hot, ecstatic, his frame charged with buoyancy, and his heart with song. The beautiful vagabonds, endowed with every grace, masters of all chimes, and knowing no bounds, how many human aspirations are realized in their free holiday lives, and how many suggestions to the poet in their flight and song. John Burroughs in Birds and Poets. End of section 17. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 18 of Birds and Nature, Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. The Rainbow Trout, Salmo irideus. The rainbow trout is a native of the mountain streams and lakes of the Pacific coast, ranging from the coast of Washington to San Diego, California. It was first made known to science in 1855 by Dr. Gibbons from specimens taken from Leander Creek, California. It is an extremely variable species, varying greatly in size, color, activity, etc. Those found near the sea spend much of their time in salt water, where living is easier, and as a result they grow larger, lose their bright color and much of their activity. They usually return to fresh water with the salmon to feast upon their eggs. The following are the most important varieties of the rainbow trout: the brook trout of western Oregon, which is abundant in the streams of the Coast Range from Puget Sound to Southern California. Those taken in the headwaters of these streams seldom exceed a pound in weight, while those taken from brackish water, having spent considerable time in the sea, usually weigh from 1 to 5 pounds. The McCloud River trout is abundant in streams of the Sierra Nevada mountains from Mount Shasta southward. It grows to a large size, reaching, in the larger and warmer bodies of water, a weight of 10 to 14 pounds. This variety is the rainbow trout of the fish culturists. It has been planted in many of our eastern streams, where it has become more or less abundant. The Kern River trout is known only from the Kern River in California. It often reaches a weight of 8 pounds. The no-she trout inhabits the Sacramento Basin. It often reaches a weight of 12 pounds. The golden trout of Mount Whitney inhabits the streams on both sides of Mount Whitney, California. The varieties mentioned here are usually recognized by students of fishes, but the angler sees many more varieties in different localities, and has given to them other names, as red sides, mountain trout, brook trout, etc. The rainbow trout, when taken from clear, cool water, is an extremely handsome fish. It is usually bluish in the upper part of the body, sides silvery. The body is everywhere covered with small dark spots, irregularly arranged and extending on the fins. The side is usually provided with a red band which extends on the sides of the head. There is usually a dash of red under the chin. As soon as the fish is taken from the water, its color changes. The red lateral band will pass through different shades of red, from a deep dark color to light crimson. The captured fish thus gives its captor a display of bright color superior to that possessed by any other fresh water fish. The rainbow trout is quite as handsome as the eastern brook trout, and affords the angler an equal amount of sport. Those found in swift mountain streams are strong swimmers. To capture them with the rod, the angler must display the highest skill possible. The same tactics which will catch a rainbow trout in one stream may fail in the next, or even a second time in the same stream. It matters not in what mountain stream you fish, the trout you catch are always superior to those you have previously taken in other streams. The food of the rainbow trout is made up largely of worms, crustacea, insect larvae, and the like. In the fall, those in salmon streams feast on salmon eggs. During the spawning time of the salmon, the trout in the ocean return to fresh water and accompany the salmon to their spawning beds. Many persons who catch them for table use do so with hooks baited with salmon eggs. Often salmon eggs are salted and dried, and thus retained as bait for the entire year. No other bait seems so tempting to the rainbow trout. The sea-run individuals are not so brightly colored as those which always remain in fresh water. On their return to fresh water they seem to have lost none of their game qualities. As a table fish they are not inferior to any fish taken in fresh water. The size of the rainbow trout depends upon its surroundings, the volume and temperature of the water, and the amount of food it contains. They vary from the mere fingerlings found in small mountain brooks to those from 10 to 14 pounds, as found in Klamath and other similar lakes. The rainbow trout will live in warmer and more sluggish water than the brook trout, and for this reason it is being planted in many streams in the East which are unsuitable for the brook trout. It is also being planted in many streams once inhabited by the brook trout, but because of the change due to civilization, have become unsuitable for them. Rainbow trout can now be found in many streams of the Allegheny region, in streams in Michigan, in the Ozark region, and in many streams of the Western States. The rainbow trout is a superior game fish. It is a vigorous biter and fights bravely for liberty. In no respects is it inferior to the eastern brook trout. The method of hatching rainbow trout is very interesting. At government hatching stations a large number of males and females are kept in ponds for breeding purposes. When ready to spawn, the eggs are easily taken from the female by gently pressing on the ventral surface of the body. After fertilizing them with milt taken in a similar way from the male, they are placed in wire trays in wooden troughs, through which there is flowing a current of water. In water of 50° Fahrenheit, the eggs will hatch in from 42 to 45 days. A female weighing 1/2 to 1 1/2 pounds will yield from 500 to 800 eggs. One from 2 to 4 pounds, 2,500 to 3,000 eggs. When the eggs are partly hatched, they may be carefully placed in trays and kept free from injury, and packed in ice and sent to any part of the country. In this way they are often sent across the continent, also to Europe, Brazil, and Japan. The cool temperature stops the hatching, which will begin again as soon as placed in water of suitable temperature. The fact that so many eggs can be taken from one female, and a very large percent, 85% or more, hatched, makes it possible to plant in suitable streams a large number of young fish each year. If the eggs were deposited in the stream by the fishes themselves, the greater number would be eaten by young fishes, crustaceans, insects, etc. Here is a case where man is able to assist Mother Nature and to preserve and widely distribute some of our most useful fishes. The rainbow trout is receiving much attention and yielding profitable returns. It will always give the angler an opportunity to display his highest skill and afford a fair recompense for the toil of fishery. Seth E. Meek. End of section 18.
Section 19 of Birds and Nature. Volume 8, Number 3, October 1900. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Nemo. Day and Night. Day is a snow-white dove of heaven. that from the east glad message brings. Night is a stealthy, evil raven, wrapped to the eyes in his black wings. Thomas Bailey Aldrich. End of section 19. This recording is in the public domain.